Hello everyone, good day. I am Mardilus Villapaz and I am the first reporter for Chapter 15, Cognitive Psychotherapy and Mindfulness-Based Therapies. So our learning objectives for this chapter are the following. First is to describe the goal of cognitive psychotherapy. Next is contrast the cognitive therapy approach with other major therapy approaches. Third, explain the major components of Elie's rational emotive behavior therapy. Fourth is identify illogical automatic thoughts using Beck's list of common thought distortions. Fifth is discuss the use of third wave therapies in psychotherapy practice. And sixth is summarize the findings of cognitive and third wave therapy outcome research. So, among today's clinical psychologists, cognitive therapy prevails. Surveys indicate a dramatic increase of popularity of this therapy, especially in the year 1980s. In fact, ito na rin yung madalas na ini-endorse ng mga contemporary clinical psychologists as their primary orientation than any single school approach. In short, cognitive therapy clearly has become the prominent approach to psychotherapy in the early part of the 21st century. The attraction to the cognitive approach may stem from a variety of factors. Because like behavioral therapy, it tends to be brief, structured, and targeted. Also, like psychodynamic therapy, it focuses on the important mental processes. In some ways, this therapy represents both the behavioral and psychodynamic approaches. There are two important historical developments that occurred around the same time, beginning in the 1950s and 1960s, contributing to the development of cognitive therapy. First is the strict applications of behavioral therapy techniques based on operant and classical conditioning didn't always work because unti-unti nang na-recognize ng mga behavioral therapists at researchers na si cognition ay malaki at mahalaga pala ang ginagampanan nito sa behavior ng isang tao. It also paves the way to the introduction of the idea na our actions aren't only entirely influenced by external stimuli, but internal mental processes too. And the second one is the eventual leaders of the cognitive therapy movement, Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, grew disillusioned with the psychoanalytic method in which they and most of their cohorts were trained. This time, they sought a new approach to therapy that addresses the client's symptoms more directly. Kumbaga, less yung focus sa past kasi more on the present siya. And as a result, it produces positive result efficiently. Now, what's the goal of cognitive therapy? Simply, that is to promote logical thinking. So, cognition, meaning thought. Cognitive therapies fundamentally presume that the way we think, yung mga iniisip natin tungkol sa isang pangyayari, determines the way we respond. Individuals' interpretations and perception of current situations, events, and problems influence how they react. Psychological problems arise from illogical cognitions. Illogical can also be irrational or unrealistic. Illogical interpretation of a life event, for example, a relationship breakup. Dinamdam ng babae na nag-break sila ng boyfriend niya dahil she felt na marami siyang pagkukulang, she thinks na it's all her fault, where in fact it's actually not, and she keeps on thinking na it won't end up this way if hindi siya ganito, ganyan. So, situation like this, if a person continually drowns his or herself with such thoughts, it can cause crippling depression or anxiety. Next is, we also have psychological wellness, which stems from logical cognitions. That is when the cognition appropriately match the event. They can lead to more adaptive or healthy reaction. Therefore, the role of the cognitive therapies is to fix faulty thinking. These are the pioneers of the cognitive approach to psychotherapy. We have Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis. Now, let's move into the importance of cognition. When referring to cognition, cognitive therapists use a lot of terms interchangeably. It can be thoughts, beliefs, interpretations, and assumptions, to name a few. When someone asks you, "Why are you so happy?" Or, "Why are you so sad today?" And then you're going to answer, "I am happy because I passed the exam. I am so sad because I left my bag at home." Things like that. And that is what you call the two-way step model, where things happen and those things directly influence our feelings. But, according to cognitive psychologists, flawed ang model because there is something missing in the middle. And so, here goes the three-step model. According to cognitive therapists, dito, na-incorporate na ang cognition. Kasi, kung sa two-step model is, ang event lang, and then directly you're feeling, sa three-step model is, first, something happens, and those things we interpret it, and lastly, those interpretations directly influence our feelings. So, this time, I'll be giving you an example of the power of cognition. Consider an unexpected overnight snowfall. At the same time, may tatlong magkakapit-bahay. Nagising sila at nakita nila ang paligid nilang punong-puno na ng snow and with more snowflakes continuing to fall. In the first house live a mail carrier who covers her route by foot. Kumbaga, naglalakad lang siya habang nagtatrabaho. It's important to recognize, however, that between seeing the snow and the feeling the dread, she has these thoughts na, "This is going to be a miserable day, I'll be cold and wet, I might slip and fall, and my route will take longer than usual." Yun yung thinking niya. While sa kabilang bahay naman ay nakatira ang isang snowplow business owner. Same, nagising siya and he saw the snow and felt so excited. And he thinks na, "Oh, what a great day today. I'm going to make a lot of money. Not to mention, I'll be able to help a lot of people." Next is ang student who didn't study for today's biology exam. She sees the snow and feels tremendous relief. Between the sight and the feeling, she thinks, "Yes, school's going to be cancelled, and I'll have an extra time to study for the exam. What a lucky break." See? The same snowfall caused very different feelings in these three people. Because for mail carrier, it's a bad idea na magkaroon ng snow kasi nakaka-apekto to sa kanyang trabaho. While si snowplow business naman, excited siya kasi magkakapera siya, magagamit ang kanyang plow, and makakatulong pa siya sa mga kapitbahay niya. While si student naman is somewhat thankful siya kasi may snow at na-move ang exam niya in which wala siya nag-study. So, she'll now have more time to study. So, it goes to show na it's not the event that happened to us, but the meaning, the interpretation that we assign to those events that shapes our feelings. So, revising cognitions. Once we accept the idea that cognition determines feelings, revising them becomes the foremost task. The goal of this one is to ensure that the thoughts a person has about a particular event rationally and logically correspond to the event itself. Because if it came out opposite, they can lead to unnecessary and unpleasant feelings. Balik tayo kay male carrier. 'Di ba? Yung thinking niya is, ay, may snow, so matatagalan ako sa pagtrabaho ko ngayong araw na ito, and then there's a possibility na ma-fire ako, mawala ang trabaho ko, and also there's this possibility na along the way, ma-slide ko, madagma ko, and I might kanang ma-aksidente ko. Inga na iyang thinking. Now, the goal of the cognitive therapist would not make this male carrier feel unrealistically positive na it would hardly be logical for her to jump for joy about this situation. But ang gagawin ni therapist now is to help revise her thoughts so they make a realistic sense. Diba, yung thinking niya, nagsanga-sanga, too preoccupied na siya with illogical reasons. So, ipa-facilitate ni therapy ngayon na ma-revise yung thoughts niya. And, at the end of the process, the male carrier might just be a bit apprehensive or down, which in comparison to being devastated by anxiety or depression. And with that, these now represent a significantly improved emotional state. Yan yung nagagawa ng pagre-revise ng ating cognition. So, there are different methods of revising cognitions. So, in general, these methods follow a common 3-stage sequence. Illogical cognitions are first identified. Next is, it's challenged. Third is, eventually, replaced with more logical cognitions. Now, the first step is the identification of illogical thoughts. We shouldn't be confused with the psychodynamic goal na giving conscious and unconscious because cognitive therapies don't dwell on the unconscious depth of the psyche. They just acknowledge the source of our cognition and automatic thoughts. Automatic, which means they take place in an instant and without any deliberation. So, just like what had happened to student, yung thinking niya, pagkakita niya ng snow, hindi na siya naisip pa na, oh, may snow, so how should I feel about it? Kumbaga, automatic na nga, somewhat thankful siya kasi may snow and hindi siya nakapag-study. So, with that, marami siyang time na makapag-study for her exam since ma-move yung klase nila. So, the primary responsibility of the cognitive therapist, especially in the early in therapy, is to assist the client in identifying automatic illogical or irrational thoughts. The second step, in which the illogical cognitions are challenged. The objective of either of these approaches is to cause the clients to doubt the truth of their illogical beliefs and to reach the conclusion that these beliefs should be revised. Later in this chapter, it will discuss na some therapies rely on the power of verbal persuasion to convince clients to abandon illogical beliefs, and yung iba naman is the clients are encouraged to test the accuracy of their beliefs na kung saan nakaayon sa real-life scenarios. And the last step is revising. After identifying and challenging the client's illogical thoughts, here comes the revising stage. Therapies are asking clients to think in ways opposite to the way they have been thinking for many years. For example, the client keeps on blaming herself because her birth is the death of his mother. Iniisip niya na buhay pa sana ang ina niya if only hindi siya ipinanganak. Kumbaga, sinasaktan niya ang kanyang sarili sa thought na it's all his fault. Now, the therapist will ask the client to think of ways na salungat sa iniisip ng kanyang client. Na maiisip ni client na eventually it was a natural death, things like that. The goal is for the clients to be able to revise their own thoughts without therapist input. According to the cognitive approach, events such as an unexpected snowstorm don't directly influence our feelings. Instead, the way we think about those events does. So, what are some possible thoughts? For example, a failing grade. Miguel got a failing grade in math. Para sa kanya, kulang na kulang yung effort na inexert niya, even if it caused him to not sleep well. Kaya ayun, he felt so bad because not only fail yung grade niya, hindi na siya mapapabilang sa listahan ng mga scholars. So, he keeps on drowning himself to that thought. While, on the other hand, same with Miguel, Joseph got a failing grade 2 in math. And yung thinking niya para sa kanya is, he just missed to study some lessons. Kaya ayun, he felt so challenged na sa susunod ay mas pagbubutihan pa niya or mas pag-iigihan pa niya yung pagsa-study niya. The process of revising cognitions should always take place in a context of cultural sensitivity, because there is no such thing as universally or absolutely logical thinking. A belief that is logical, rational, or adaptive for members of one culture may be illogical, irrational, or maladaptive for members of another culture. There, culturally competent cognitive therapists are aware of the influence that their own cultural background has on their view of logical thinking, and are careful not to impose their own cultural values on their clients in the process of revising or restructuring clients' cognition. So, when it comes to culture, there are really boundaries na kailangan natin tingnan. Next, teaching as a therapy tool. Cognitive therapists explicitly include in their duties the education of their clients about the cognitive approach. Kumbaga, cognitive therapists often function as teachers with their clients too, in a way na they'll be incorporating a combination of mini lecture, handout, and readings para ma-explain talaga ang difference ni 2-step at 3-step models of understanding the source of our feelings. Next is, they train clients to recognize illogical thoughts, to assign labels to them para ma-fully recognize talaga ni client na ito yung illogical thought ko and this thing should be revised, and to track them in a particular written format. And like any good teacher, cognitive therapists aspire for clients ultimately to be able to use the lessons learned to teach themselves rather than remaining dependent on the teacher. So, another similarity between cognitive therapists and teachers is the assignment of homework. Cognitive therapists strongly believe that much of the work of therapy is conducted between sessions. In some cases, the homework is written. Much like the time between class meetings of a college course, the time between therapy sessions is used to explore and confirm the lessons learned. This time, clients will be asked to keep a record of events, cognitions, feelings, and attempt to revise the cognition to change the feelings that they are experiencing. Next is, in other cases, the homework is behavioral. They will be asked to perform a specific behavior before the next meeting for a purpose of examining the validity of an illogical thought. So, for example, a client with a talent for acting who is afraid to act in front of an audience because of fear of failure may be asked to take a small part in a stage play. The client is helped to replace irrational beliefs like, if I look foolish, this proves I'm a fool. If I'm not like, that would be awful. I will fail and therefore be a failure. With more positive messages such as this, even if I do behave foolishly at times, this does not make me a foolish person. I can act, I will do my best I can. It's nice to be liked, but not everybody has to be liked to be liked. And if they don't, that isn't the end of the world. If I fail, I am a human and not a failure. Next, in either case, discussion of the homework will constitute a significant part of the subsequent sessions. Now, cognitive therapy with lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender clients. So, over the years, the society's attitude towards the LGBT community have become more accepting. 'Di ba? Na-observe nyo naman na yung society natin ngayon is very welcoming na siya sa LGBT community. However, according to Purcell, Swan, and Herbert, they argue nga, despite the social changes, there are still negative attitudes towards the LGBT community, and it still persists in our society, and this for sure affects them. So, there's this term, internalized homophobia, an aversion to homosexuality applied by gay individuals to themselves, pervades gay and lesbian culture to some extent. So, kumbaga, sila mismo, nasad sila contradiction sa ilahang sariling gender. They have biases among themselves too in their gender roles. Na they may feel na, ay, bayot ko, that means, I don't act according to what the society is expecting me to act, and that means I'm a failure, or ako ang pagka-part sa LGBT community is contradict man siya to the belief of our family or our church. So that means dili ko nila totally madawat. Nganang ginafeed nila, preoccupied ilang huna-huna sa ingana nga thought good. And that is internalized homophobia. So another example for that is Caitlyn Jenner. So Caitlyn Jenner is previously known as Bruce Jenner. So, he is the father of Kendall and Kylie. He was an Olympian before and now a transgender. Pero, siya mismo, ni-oppose niya sa idea na siya as transgender mo appeal sa sports for women because for him, it's unfair given na the masculinity and his previous training. He was trained before as a man, rigid ilang training, very hard kayo. Tapos, all of a sudden, dili siya masugot nga, ipaapil ang mga transgender sa sport, kunwari, track and field, because the difference of the training of men and women. So, nga examples like that. So, that is, gay or lesbian individuals may hold some belief that disapprove of their own sexual orientation or lifestyle. Si cognitive therapist, pag iyang client kay isa ka LGBT, dili siya ga-focus sa sexual orientation sa iyang client because the therapist focuses more on the cognitions because ang sexual orientation, wala na siya kalabutan sa therapy. So, LGBT clients bring the same problems to therapy as heterosexual clients do. But in addition, they may be struggling with some cognitions related to internalized homophobia as described by Purcell et al. So, the next slides, the remaining slides, I will just give an overview because this will be expounded more by the next reporter. So, a brief, structured, focused approach. So, cognitive therapists strive to achieve a positive therapy outcome quite quickly. So, Therapy like this will run fewer than 15 sessions, pero if the case is severe or very complex, then expected na more than 15 sessions na siya. And for outpatients, the sessions typically take place once per week, eventually tapering off in frequency as the client improves. Several factors contribute to the efficiency of cognitive therapy, including its focus on the client's current problems rather than extensive exploration of the past. So, mo ning gi-discuss katong sa two developments good nga ni arise nga. They focus more on the past and they focus more on the present rather than on the past, and nakita nila nga efficient ang results. Next is a purposeful, goal-oriented focus on clearly identified symptoms and structured therapy sessions. So, next is the structured nature of cognitive therapy sessions differ sharply from the free-flowing, spontaneous style of humanistic therapy. Because si cognitive therapy sets na agenda nga ginaset. Typically, each session is sequentially organized into segments. So, ipakita na ko later kung ang kaning mga segments. And sometimes, each segment is allotted a specific amount of time. So, two approaches to cognitive therapy. Si Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, the two approaches unquestionably overlap in terms of their emphasis on improving client symptoms via correcting illogical thinking. Mao na siya ilang murag common denominator. However, ang terminology at times and also the techniques that they employ, that distinguish them from each other. Their common denominator is to correct the illogical thinking of their client. Pero, ilahang techniques is lahi silang duha. And that will further be explained by the next reporter. So, mo ni akong giingon nga segment kanina. So, this is the typical sequential structure of a cognitive therapy session. First is the client's mood or emotional status and solicit brief updates on recent events. Next, set and confirm the agenda for the current session. So our agenda for today is like this, like that. You are expected to like this, like that. Next is establish a link to the previous session, often by reviewing previous homework assignments. So nato example kanina na before starting the session is napay role play ba nga mahitabo ana. And then next is progress through the body of the current session, proceeding step by step through the agenda. So, himay-himayan na nila tong agenda na ilang giset. And next, develop and assign new homework assignment. But, kani nga homework assignment is, this should be agreed by both the therapy and the client. And lastly, summarize current session and solicit client feedback. And that's all for my report. Thank you so much for listening and mabuhay. Bye!